We are here to discuss about the unfolding of two transitional phases in Indian prehistory leading on to the historical period. Now, this discussion will also throw light on the new adaptations to new ecological and geographical horizons which will set the core of Indian history in the subsequent phase. Now, for this discussion, I have with me research scholars Chirantani Das, who is presently teaching in St. Xavier's College, and Nibaburi Banerjee, who is presently teaching at the Netaji Nagar College. Around 1900 BCE, a Chalcolithic culture emerges in the Upper Ganga Valley and in Rajasthan, which has been designated by the pottery that was used, which is known as the ochre-colored pottery. Now, this culture constitutes something of an enigma, both because a number of scholars have thrown about various theories regarding its cultural affiliations and authorship, and also because it marks the end of the Copper Bronze Age in India. Now, this culture is followed at many places by another culture which is marked by the distinguished pottery which is known as the painted grey ware, and that has been followed by another phase of occupation which is again designated by the distinguished pottery northern black polished ware, and this actually leads on to the historical phase. So, a discussion of all these three cultures actually opens up the transitional phase from Copper Bronze Age to the Iron Age and from prehistory to the historical phase in the Indian subcontinent.
Ma'am, can you speak a little on the time-space setting for these cultures?
Yes, for example, the OCP actually, as I told you, begins around 1900 BCE, and it follows and sometimes coincides with the later phase of the mature Harappan culture, as also towards the end it coincides with, for example, the cemetery age culture or other late Harappan cultures. And this has been followed by the painted grey ware culture in many of the sites in the Upper Ganga Valley and in Rajasthan, and followed by the NBP ware culture, which actually ranges in time from 600 BCE to 200 BCE. Now, so far as the spatial horizon is concerned, we find that the OCP had flourished in Rajasthan and Upper Ganga Valley, but the painted grey ware period actually extended far beyond that horizon. We find that it spread from the lower Indus Valley in the west to the eastern UP in the east, and also from Tehri region in Uttarakhand in the north and to Madhya Pradesh in the south. Now, it is very interesting to note that the painted grey ware culture is actually denoted as such, because at the same time we find that the actual ware constitutes only 15% of the total ware that has been found. Other ceramics that were found along with this painted grey ware were the black slipped ware, the fine red slipped ware, the blackened red ware, and the other red coarse ware and fine slipped red ware, etc. But it is because of its extremely distinctive characteristic that the painted grey ware was chosen as the index for this whole cultural complex, which ushered in the Iron Age in the subcontinent.
Ma'am, can you please tell me the type of the pottery which is known as the ochre-colored pottery?
Yeah, this pottery is again, identifying this pottery has been something of a problem, and there have been debates about this too, because originally speaking this pottery is supposed to be of a red thick slip, and the ochre color actually was transformed into an ochre color due to probably either waterlogging or the actions of wind erosion or due to ill firing. So this has been a problem for identification, and the general idea is that it may have been possibly due to the actions of all the three factors taken together. But basically the pottery is an ill-fired one, there is no doubt about that, and the fabric ranges from fine to medium, and there are sometimes designs painted on it like black bands, and sometimes some shards have shown incised designs as well as some kind of boring marks or after firing graffiti marks. So this is the kind of pottery that we are dealing with here, which is known as the ochre colored pottery. Chirantani, can you enlarge upon the sites where the OCP has been found?
Actually, in 1950-51, several sites in western Uttar Pradesh has been identified as the OCP sites, like the Bisauli in Badaun district and Rajpur Parsu in Bijnor district. And later on, a large number of OCP sites were identified in the Doab region, like the Saharanpur, Muzaffarnagar, Meerut or Bulandshahr. And over 80 sites have been identified in the Saharanpur region alone.
Okay.
And the OCP sites are extended beyond this region as well. In north-south, they are extended from a place called Badarabad near Haridwar in Uttar Pradesh to Jodhpura and No in Rajasthan. And in east-west, they are extended from Katpalon near Jalandhar to Ahichhatra near Bareilly. Now, the OCP phase in Rajasthan seems to be older than that of the Doab region.
Yes, yes.
Ma'am, we know that there is a lot of issues involved in identifying the sequence in which the OCP has been found.
Yes, it is because in most places in the western side where the OCP has been found, we see that it is either found alongside late Harappan pottery or later part of mature Harappan pottery, or it is found in an independent sequence in the eastern zone. For example, at sites like Bargaon in Haryana and Ambakhari in northwesternmost part of Uttar Pradesh, which is bordering on Haryana and Uttarakhand, the OCP has been found interlocked with the late Harappan pottery, and that has led to the debate that whether this cannot be identified as a kind of a degenerate form of late Harappan pottery. On the other hand, at the eastern zone, in the eastern zone sites, we find that OCP actually exists independently. So scholars believe that it might have led on to an independent ceramic tradition. So by all these evidence, we mean to say that there might have been two zones of the OCP culture. One in the western side represented at sites like Jodhpura, Siswal, Mitathal, Bargaon, Ambakhari, Bara, etc., where there was a connection between the OCP and the late Harappan. On the other hand, we have the eastern sites like Lal Killa, Atranji Khera, Saipai, where no such connections are evident. Nipapuri, would you tell us something about the absolute dates for the OCP?
Thermoluminescent dates from Atranji Khera, Lal Killa, Nasirpur and Jinjina range between 2650 and 1180 BC. The ochre color pottery can be seen as late contemporary of mature Harappa and late Harappan cultures, with certain sites showing contact between them.
Ma'am, can you tell us something about the general layout of the OCP sites, like the settlement space unit?
You see, the OCP cultural depositions are generally very shallow at most of the sites, and that poses a problem of identification as well as graphing the data. At most sites, the cultural sequence is only about 0.5 meters to 1.15 meters thick. Besides that, we find that the area of occupation is also very limited within the sites where they have been found, and number of sites are also much less than the later cultural complexes that I was talking about. So this makes it a very small sized cultural complex. Having said that, I must point out that of course in the Upper Ganga Valley we find more incidence of the OCP, and the Saharanpur district is found to be the area where most of the sites are concentrated, as much as about 4 to 6 kilometers distant from each other. So there's a close concentration of sites there. In other regions of the Upper Ganga Valley, we find that sites are spaced from about 5 to 8 kilometers distant from each other. So the Upper Ganga Valley, of course, was the house of the OCP, so to say.
Right.
Okay.
Ma'am, can you tell us about the food and subsistence about this culture?
Yeah, we find there are clear evidence for agriculture having been practiced and also animal husbandry. For example, from Atranji Khera we find that rice and barley and gram and kesari have been cultivated, and from Lal Killa we find that all the three cereals, wheat, barley and rice, were cultivated. Now the Atranji Khera evidence is very interesting because it shows you that at least 2 seasons of cultivation was taking place at that place, because we find that barley and kesari are winter crops, whereas rice and gram are summer crops. So that is a very interesting evidence. Now again from Sai Pai we have indirect evidence for food processing, because we have stone querns, pestles, grounders, pounders, etc. So and for so far as irrigation is concerned, at Atranji Khera we have got deep circular pits which might have served as kacha wells. And interesting to note is that the people living in that area nowadays still use such kacha wells for irrigating their cultivation fields. So this is a very interesting evidence for OCP. Nivaburi, can you enlarge more about the cultural assemblages at the OCP sites in general?
Apart from pottery, the few artifacts include stone objects such as coins and beads, some copper objects from Lal Killa comprising of an arrowhead, a bead, 2 pendants and a broken celt.
About the material assemblage of OCP at different sites, we find that at No and Jodhpura, for example, in Rajasthan, a number of copper items have been found. And again at Sai Pai on the eastern side we have come across a number of copper items, and there has been interesting debate arising out of the fact that in some cases in the eastern zone some of these findings have been correlated with another culture which is designated as the copper hoard culture. Now the total authorship of copper hoard culture as well as dating is an extremely difficult problem, and so at present this remains in the level of debate and surmises only. Taken together, we find that the OCP actually ushered in the painted graver, the next phase, which will really begin with the Iron Age complex in the Indian subcontinent. Now as to the characteristic of the painted graver, which is a very exclusive and very fine ware, we may say that it is a well fired, wheel turned pottery. The color, the shade ranges from a soft silvery grey to a very strong battleship grey, on which we find very simple painted designs in black. The designs are actually geometric in nature, very simple dots and lines, and the medium with which this pottery was made was a very well levigated high quality clay. Now can you enlarge a little bit more about the painted graver pottery?
Yeah, the designs actually involve crisscross lines, a chain of short spirals, a row of Greek letter sigma, and geometric patterns like squares, rounds, swastikas, etc. However, there are no human or animal figure, and even naturalistic patterns like floral designs or sun symbols are also less common.
Yes. Now there is another factor about the way in which the painted graver sites were discovered which needs to be discussed here. You see, generally speaking, the excavation, the research on excavated sites is a fortuitous one. I mean, an excavator tumbles on a site and then kind of interprets the data on the basis of the findings. Take for example the Harappan sites. But in case of painted graver, we find there was a distinct approach, a deliberate approach to try and correlate the sites and the cultural complex with the legends in the epics. At the beginning, when the first painted graver shards were found at Ahitchatra in 1940-41, this was not really regarded as representing a definite cultural complex. But later on, when it was found at Hastinapur in 1950-52, the excavators thought that probably this might be correlated with the Mahabharata legends and all that. And then there was a deliberate attempt to go about searching for exactly those places mentioned in the legends, in the epic legends, and go and search in those spots. Interestingly enough, at almost all these sites, painted graver was found at very substantial layers, but the problems of dating were there, very much there, and therefore what it actually comes down to is that we cannot really with any certainty relate this to the legends of the epics. And scholars like B.D. Chattopadhyay have raised issues regarding this, that whether the Mahabharata legends or the Ramayana legends can really prove to be a good starting points for a preconceived search for excavation sites. At the end of the day, we find that finally the excavations have given us a very good output by finding us the Iron Age, the first Iron Age complex in the Indian subcontinent. The painted graver horizon is a very vast one, stretching about 1400 square kilometers from west to east and 900 square kilometers from north to south.
And ma'am, it has been found that altogether 850 PGW sites have been discovered so far, and among them 108 are spread over eastern Punjab, 258 in Haryana, 101 in Rajasthan, 218 sites in Uttar Pradesh, and a few sites in Madhya Pradesh have been located.
Yes. Among this, we find that one of the largest site is at Satwali, which is located in the lower Ghaggar basin, and the site is actually ranging about 13.7 hectares. The other sites in this particular region are below 5 hectares, but substantially large sites. Now, with that, we come to the material culture of the painted grey. Now, this is a very interesting cultural complex ushering in the Iron Age, as I have told you, and the cultural equipments, especially iron equipments found at Atranjikhera, actually represents quite well the vast range of iron objects that were being made by the people here. In fact, Jakhera and Atranjikhera, both in the same region in Uttar Pradesh, are the most well documented sites. At Atranjikhera, we find that a number of objects, iron objects like arrowheads, spearheads, axes, knives, etc. have been found, and alongside we find other cultural assemblages. Most of the habitation units were found to be of wattle and daub type, and with round post holes at some areas. We have also come across a kind of a water channel with a bandh in Jakhera, which shows some kind of an irrigation management. And so far as crops are concerned, we find that people were cultivating wheat, barley and rice, which was already introduced at the OCP level. And they were also using considerable animal food, and hunting of wild deer was also prevalent. And besides the domesticated cattle, buffalo, pig, etc., goat and sheep, we have the domestic dog and the horse, especially the horse, and that has led to the idea that probably painted graver culture was very closely linked with the later Vedic culture, what with the use of iron and the horse both together, and what with the geographical local in which the painted graver had spread, which matches with the information that we get from the later Vedic period. And that takes us on to the northern black polished ware zone. So here we find that the whole culture had really flourished and zoomed up, and it really stretches from the Punjab in the west to Bihar, Bengal in the east, okay, and from Uttaranchal in the north to Vindhyas in the south. So within this very big orbit, which would witness the rise of the 16 Mahajanapadas on the one hand, and the territorial states which actually coincided with the 16 Mahajanapadas, may be identified with the 16 Mahajanapadas on the other. Okay, and within this very vast orbit, we find that there was a cultural efflorescence of a different kind. We find that this was the time which actually coincides with the emergence of writing, which we find in form of inscriptions, also graffiti, potsherd graffiti around the 4th century BC from the Tamil sites, okay, and then we have Ashokan inscriptions towards the end of the northern black polished ware phase. On the other hand, we also have the rise of the cities, urban complexes, especially in the region where the northern black polished ware had flourished. Many of the spots which are described in the accounts of the lives of Mahavira and Buddha have been associated with the northern black polished ware. One very interesting point to mention here, and to show how historical data and archaeological information can be put together to envision a new kind of idea, is that how the Buddhist relic casket found at Piprawa has been identified with the northern black polished ware sequence. And this is also clearly mentioned in the Ashokan inscription at Lumbini, that Lumbini was the birthplace of the Buddha, and Piprawa is actually situated a few miles north of the Lumbini region. So the whole connection of the region with northern black polished ware and with the origins of Buddhism gives us a kind of a context, a total historical context, which has been salvaged based on the corroborated evidence from archaeological as well as historical investigations. And a similar such evidence is also available from South India. For example, the Sangam literature, which gives us data on the mid-1st millennium BC, mentions that the first capital of the Pandyas was established as at Korakai, which is at the mouth of the Tamraparni river. And interestingly enough, excavations at Korakai has revealed a northern black polished ware phase. Now, it is possible that this culture was associated with the development of a capital city of the Pandyas. So the emergence of territorial states hand in hand with the northern black polished ware cultural complex is of course a very great possibility. It's a certain fact of history. Now coming here, we also must look at the iron objects that have been found from the northern black polished ware complex. We cannot really take all the examples, but from the site of Rajghat we have come across a number of structural as well as iron objects. Structural objects include the building of a moat, quite deep and wide at the mouth, as well as laying down of roads and lanes, okay, and also the prepared house floors with multiple hearths, and also a raised platform of uneven mud brick. And we see the first initiation of mud brick and burnt bricks. At painted grey ware level also we have come across a few burnt bricks, but they were used for indeterminate purposes. But at the northern black polished ware level we find that there was a kind of a specific use of burnt bricks. For example, the wells at Atranjikhera were lined with terracotta rings, and that shows that some of these were used for soakage pits and others were used for drinking water well. So this is a very interesting evidence so far as structural complex is concerned. Fortifications were also available with moats and ditches, etc., at many of these sites, which coincide with the northern black polished ware phase, showing how urban complexes and northern black polished ware actually coincided. Okay, so we have a completely new cultural paradigm evolving in the whole area which witnessed the rise of the northern black polished ware. Now the interesting fact of iron equipments is that although in the painted grey ware level we found that use of iron was initiated, but that was at a basic minimum. At the northern black polished ware, yes, we find a full-fledged development of the use of iron and for commonplace everyday use. And such items like borers, nails, ring fasteners, hooks, clamps, plump bobs, socketed clamps and other things shows that they were household tools even for the purposes of building houses. Okay, so this is a very interesting thing where iron was now becoming an indispensable metal for building such units which would be used for other kinds of crafts or other things. Okay, so this actually makes for a new innovative stage in craft specialization also. For example, there was also the rise of glass for the first time on the ceramic horizon of historical period. So the cultural complex associated with this highly innovative, exclusive pottery, the manufacturing process of which is still under discussion and under research, actually leads on to the whole complex of historic period in in the Indian subcontinent. It was an exclusive pottery. The researches on it shows the use of some kind of alkaline substance and the use of an alumina silicate, soda alumina silicate, to finish this object with a glossy surface and a glossy finish. Now this itself shows the height of innovation in craft manufacture that had been achieved by the people of these times. This also initiates writings as also the metallic currency for the first time. Okay, so as we know that a hallmark of an urban complex is in its writings and in its metallic currency and also in its public structures, the use of space for public use. All these things come together in the northern black polished ware phase. So historically speaking, the data that archaeology provides us to interpret the emergence of city-states, the emergence of territorial states, the emergence of monarchical states for the first time on the horizons of historic India is extremely well illustrated with archaeological evidence. All these feats illuminate upon the height of cultural and intellectual milieu which had provided the foundation stone to the history of Indian subcontinent.